In this video, I will briefly describe the difference between deductive and inductive logic. I will also explain the connections between the two and show how both kinds of logic are important for knowledge production. In fact, they can be envisioned as integral parts of an overall cycle of research, as both connect theory with empirical observations. Deductive logic is sometimes referred to as a top-down approach because it starts with abstract theory, which we often envision as higher, and then moves to specific empirical observations. When researchers use deductive logic, they first start with a broad theory. They then articulate specific hypotheses to test that theory, and then systematically collect data by which they can test their hypotheses. If the data support the hypotheses, then the theory is also supported, but it's not proved either. If the data do not support the hypothesis, then the theory is not supported, but it's also not disproved. So for example, let's say that I have a theory that women are smarter than men. I would then need to generate some hypotheses or predictions to test that theory. Hypotheses are always stated as if-then statements. So I might say, if women are smarter than men, then they should have higher GPAs. I would then look at the GPAs at both women and men within a particular setting and see if there's a difference. This is my empirical observation. If women's GPAs were on average higher than men's, then my hypotheses or prediction would be supported, and that could then potentially also support my theory. Note that the data would not and cannot prove or disprove my theory. Instead, it can only support or not support my theory. So the goal here is to test theory. And to do this best, this usually involves statistical analysis in large numbers of cases. In contrast, inductive logic is sometimes referred to as bottom-up logic. Here, researchers start with making broad empirical observations. The goal here is to build theory, not to test it. Often, not always, inductive research involves qualitative data, so looking at a few cases with the eye towards deep, nuanced, and a meaningful understanding of those cases. So for example, a researcher who is interested in student learning may observe students in classrooms and also talk with them after class about their experiences. The researcher may then begin to find patterns in terms of some students being more likely to participate in some classes than others. After collecting sufficient amount of empirical data, the researcher may then be able to start making some tentative hypotheses to explain these patterns. And from there, a theory of classroom engagement and success may begin to be built. In sum, when researchers use deductive logic, they first start with a broad theory and then articulate specific hypotheses to test that theory, and then systematically collect data by which they can test their hypotheses. When researchers use inductive logic, they start with observations and from there start to see patterns and from there start to develop theory. In truth, people are often using both kinds of logic simultaneously. We both come into situations with existing ideas about the world, and we also hopefully are open to collecting new information to then revise our existing ideas about the world. But it is important from a researcher perspective to be able to differentiate between the two in order to systematically evaluate the process by which we are making our conclusions.